Hello and welcome to the ILC Home and Commercial webinar series looking at environmental and agricultural claims. I'm Alan Sousa, I'm the chair of ILC's Home and Commercial arm. So firstly, let me have a big thanks to our sponsors today. Our main sponsors, platinum sponsors, are Questgate, who of course hold massive expertise in this area, and I'm absolutely delighted that Chris Hall and his team have decided to back us with this. It really helps get these particular types of seminar out to as many people as possible. Also to our silver sponsors, RSK Raw, and a big thanks to Neil Stothert and his team as well. In this series, we're going to be taking a look at all aspects of environmental and agricultural claims, the risks, the exposures, the use and timeliness of experts, and of course, all the legal and regulatory aspects which can come into play. So let's get on with today's webinar. So in today's webinar, we're going to be looking at agricultural claims, a niche area of insurance speciality. And again, this is going to give us an understanding of what actually happens in this specific area of insurance, the complexities, and some of the implications it has. So I'm delighted to have a really expert panel with us. That's built them up, hasn't it? So we've got Frank McGaffney from Questgate, Chris Hurst from NIG FarmWeb, Bryan Brown from Dennis O'Brien, Joe Krisnick from NIG as well, and Jackie Evans, who's at RSK ADAS. So really welcome to have you all. Delighted to have you here. Any questions or anything anybody's got, please don't go on to the live button at the bottom of Zoom because this is recorded. But questions or comments, please send them to me at alan@iloveclaims.com. Always good to hear from you, and we'll deal with that when we go through. A couple of quick plugs. The ILC Home and Property Conference, Claims Conference, will be on in Coventry on the 11th of November. 450 claims professionals there to watch it. If you want any advice on how we can publicise that through any sponsorship or exhibition stands, please contact my colleague Nick at NIC. So that's Nick, nic@iloveclaims.com. For any questions or general comments, just come to me at alan@iloveclaims.com. Also, if you want to go on to the reserve list for the ILC Home and Commercial Lunch, networking lunch on the 1st of October, it is fully booked, but there is a waiting list there for anybody who wants to do it. Also, just give us a shout at alan@iloveclaims.com. But anyway, let's go on and find out a little bit more, open the door to agricultural claims and look at the niche itself. So I'm going to start with some general questions. So I'm going to come to you first, Chris, if that's all right. What changes have there been in the approach to managing agricultural claims over the last, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, well, various really, I would say, and I would say that Joe's, having been around for the last 10 years in FarmWeb, Joe's probably the more of a font of knowledge than I am. But from my perspective, I think there's probably three things that immediately spring to mind, which would be the diversification activities of farmers, which have evolved over the last 10 years, which have seen the type of claim change that we see on a sort of regular basis, which has meant that our business has had to evolve in terms of how we deal with those claims, increasing the likes of biomass boilers, increasing the volume of claims around such things as that. But lastly, really, in terms of the management of the claims, it's more in the how, really, and the introduction of technology in terms of how we manage claims. Our business has evolved both at the front end in terms of we're now full cycle e-trade in terms of trading with our brokers, but similarly on the claims side as well. And again, I don't want to steal Joe's thunder, but we now take first notification of loss online. There's technology throughout the process in terms of how we interact with clients and adjusters, just to make that process a lot slicker and a lot more efficient, and get to settlement quicker.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. Frank, what about you? What do you think's changed in the last 5 to 10 years?
From my perspective, technology has been a big enabler for loss adjusting, and we have handheld devices where we can record our site notes, we can take photographs and videos, and we can upload those from site, 4G permitting. And then those appear within our bespoke IT system at Questgate called Cube. And clients can access these photographs and notes, and when we upload the site notes, it pre-populates the vast majority of certain types of report. Our clients can access those immediately, even before the loss adjusters back in the office to complete the report. We're using drone technology and also satellite imagery for assessing and measuring forestry claims. That's been a big advancement in recent years. And we can undertake virtual visits with bespoke technology, which was a big factor during lockdown, where many of my colleagues who deal with general property claims couldn't attend site, and they were doing video visits. But from a farm claims perspective, there is a traditional element to handling these claims, and farmers, brokers, agents, they like to have face-to-face meetings. And with the majority of farm claims being outdoors, we're able to undertake those COVID safe. So whilst tech's been a big enabler, there is still a traditional personal touch to handling farm claims.
Okay, now that's interesting how the technology is making it easier. And I guess we hear of that and other things. And if you logically think things like drone and the vast movement satellites, amazing to help us at least get assessments quicker. From a broker perspective, then, looking at Bryan, what do you think's changed in the last 5 to 10 years about the approach to managing these claims?
Yeah, there's probably been quite a big shift in the last 5 to 10 years, especially what we've seen is more and more insurance companies who maybe do commercial business and agricultural business specialising their teams off, so they actually have an agricultural team within the claims team, which has helped us a lot, because we're dealing with people that know the challenges that we face day in, day out, and our clients face day in, day out. So that's been a big help. There's pretty much everybody now from the insurance companies we deal with have their own agricultural based teams. As Frank touched on as well, just there, the technology has been a real help. It's really allowed for quicker settlements to be made. A lot more things have been able to be desktoped, which means you're not having to wait days for somebody to go out and actually see a claim. So we've seen the turnaround and how we've actually managed to pay claims out a lot quicker over the past 5 to 10 years, without a doubt. And I think going forward, there's also a lot more to be done within agriculture in terms of maybe using apps and things like that to report claims. I think that's kind of been happening more in the mainstream commercial market, but maybe not so much in the agricultural sector. So I think there's a lot more that to come over the next 5 to 10 years, which will allow us to settle claims even faster again.
Yeah, and is that, Bryan, just to continue that, is that, I'm trying to phrase this, but is that because it may take longer to take some of the agricultural workers and farm owners, it may take them longer to get out of face-to-face stuff and get more used to perhaps more modern technology in the aspects of meeting with people, settling in a claim? I know they use lots of it on the farm, but is there a reluctance there?
Definitely in the last year and a half it's changed. I think as Frank touched on there, I think farmers do like the traditional approach of someone to go out and see them. However, if you said to us a year and a half ago you'd be doing the majority of your renewal calls on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and I think you would have thought you were mad. So that's shown that the industry can change quickly, and was forced to do that, which has actually helped a lot. And I think that's the route a lot of, from speaking to clients, are happy to go down now, maybe doing these calls every year. And I think pushing them towards claims and towards apps and things like that, that's, as the younger generation come through, I think they're becoming more and more open to that, because you say there's so much technology that they're using elsewhere within the business at the moment, probably just not so much when it comes to insurance.
Okay. Jackie, I know that from time to time you're called in to help with disputes and advice and making some assessments on agricultural claims. What have you seen in terms of the change in approach to managing these claims over the last 5 or 10 years?
I think probably what the other speakers have already said in terms of farmers have embraced technology, and certainly even the last year there's been some big leaps and changes in the way that individual farmers will use video technology and are quite happy to do things online. I don't think we should underestimate the level of connectivity in some parts of the country. You know, there are still areas that have got huge broadband issues, and that does cause problems. Most farmers have got a smartphone, at least one on the property these days, but you know, there are still issues around connectivity, and it does cause problems at times. But I think generally, you know, they are happy to use online facilities. They do like face-to-face, there's no doubt about it, and that may be a generational issue as well, as we see some of the younger family members and farmers coming through. But certainly, I suppose from our point of view, sometimes it's root cause, and when you're investigating claims and that, you can't always see everything from a video situation, and you know, you do need to go onto the farm and have a good look round, and pick up some of the other issues that might have contributed to the incident or accident in the first place. So that's, you know, from our point of view, technology is great, but sometimes you do need to actually get your boots on the ground.
Okay, I guess, Joe, that's one of the difficult things, isn't it, when you go through the last 5 to 10 years and we look at the changes and the approach to managing these claims is getting the balance right between trying to do the speed of stuff and get things done quickly, but really understanding what's going on in the first place. So has that changed in the last decade?
It's just a case really of adapting to, you know, each claim has to be taken on its merits. There's without doubt, as everybody else has said, the benefits you get of a face-to-face meeting, you know, can't necessarily be replicated, especially with some of the changes in the type of kit that we're seeing. Chris touched on, you know, we've got far more ventures into renewable energy, biotechnology, those types of things. So as we've touched on, biomass boilers, anaerobic digesters. 10 years or so ago, we weren't really seeing anything of that ilk, but these days that is very much at the forefront, trying to stay on top of all environmental impacts that we can. Okay. Chris had also mentioned about diversification, and we're seeing much wider spread of additional activities, and just sort of stress the need for both our clients and brokers to ensure that those are all disclosed, because there's nothing worse than coming to the point of claim and finding out that there's some quite involved activities that we didn't know about, which can increase your PL risks and everything else. So just making sure that those are all, you know, disclosed to us and rated accordingly, so that at the point of claim, you know, it can all run smoothly.
Well, it is very interesting, isn't it? And I guess, you know, moving back to Chris, given these complexities, given diversification, given environmental issues, given the technology change, the next bit's going to be difficult, because I'm going to ask, you know, how important is service to the sector? Well, I guess it's very, very important. But how do you do that? How do you make it with all the key differentiators that customers, insurers and brokers are looking for, while you've got all this quite considerable change taking place at one time? So
how important is service? It's vital, I think, but without wishing to pigeonhole an entire industry sector, you know, by the nature, farmers are very busy people, and sort of auxiliary purchases such as insurance can often sort of come sort of down the priority list, I guess, in terms of the more income generating stuff. So doesn't always give us a great deal of time to be creative and come up with the right sort of solutions for them. So we have to kind of we have to be flexible on the sales and service side to come up with the right propositions quickly, and then on the claims side, as Joel's kind of referred to, doing the right things at the right times, and being as front foot as possible. In terms of differentiators, if you'd have asked me 2 years ago, I would have said it's about being flexible and about being creative. Now I would add into that resilient as well. You know, with what's gone on over the past couple of years, it's been important for us to have that resilience, and to make sure that we're reacting in the right ways, which I think, you know, we've managed to do at Farmer.
Okay, Frank, you're the feet in the ground guy here. You know, when you can get there. I've done that. You go on there, you're dealing with, and the point Chris makes very good one there. You're trying to deal with people who work long hours, and at certain times of the year have horrendous schedules for, as Chris quite rightly pointed out, income-generated activities. So what kind of service level do these guys looking for? Yeah. And how does that equate to what the brokers and everybody else wants in the process as well?
Yeah, it's a fine balance, getting the sort of modern claim process using tech and the traditional handling of farm claims. And if an insurer might want an update on a file every 10 days, but I know that if I phone an arable farmer every 10 days during harvest, I'll get an earful. So it's understanding the different farming enterprises and the times of year when farmers are particularly busy, and striking the right balance, having that personal touch, which the farmers and brokers and agents really appreciate, and having a balance of using the correct tech where appropriate to speed up claim handling, speed up payment process, and keeping insurers updated.
Okay. It is a challenge because, you know, in many parts of the industry, we have different people going into it, and often, as you know, more domestic claims, you can have quite a different number of people dealing with and trying to put the claim right. So it is a more complex area. Bryan, how do you set astride of this and making sure that you know what's going on, but understanding that for the likes of Frank, it might just be a bit tough to get the updates that he requires?
Yeah, it can be a challenge at times. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But you know, you asked the question how important is service. Service is what we do. It's the industry that we're in. Yeah. We've got to provide and to all, no matter what sector we're dealing with. Probably in particular to agriculture though, because we know that you know, there's outside factors that impacts their business they don't have control over, such as the weather. So we know in peak times of harvest or you know, with the planting time, that something needs to be repaired and something needs to be sorted. It has to be back in the field that it had to be done yesterday. So you know, we understand that the expectations that we've got to go by sometimes, and you know, the client understands that as long as we are on top of it and the insurance company are on top of it and are getting regularly updated with how things are going. I think that's what the biggest thing I'm looking for is communication, to understand where they're at and what they're doing, and explaining us as a broker what we're doing for them. But no, it's you know, it's the most important thing that we're doing in this industry is when it comes to claims is make sure they're settled quickly. And in terms of brokers as well, what we're looking for from insurance companies at the moment is quick response times. You know, when we're interacting with insurance companies, we want to get an answer as soon as we can to go back to the client to update them of how the progress is being made, and also decisions being made quickly. There's nothing worse for a broker when, you know, we've got all information, we've put it across, and there's not a decision being made on the other end, and the client's constantly at you to see where you know, where things are going and what's happening. So I think that's a couple of main areas I would say from a broker's point of view and a client's point of view, that how services impacts them.
I guess Jackie, back to you on this one, is to come in at the end of some of these, the thing that Bryan is talking about there, and what Frank and Chris have said before is there you know, in 1 minute the client doesn't want touched because I want to get on with stuff that isn't serious. The next minute it becomes critical. So how difficult is it to make quick decisions that Bryan is looking at the insurers to do, but really understand some of the difficulties in assessing what's actually happened? So is there a real clash there?
I think there can be, but I think if you know, you understand the seasonality of the business, as you say, arable farmers are busy now. You know, sheep farmers around lambing time. So it's understanding the business and the enterprises they've got on the business and part of it. And you've already touched on the diversification, and that's important as well, because often there will be different activities going on the farm, and they will often be run under the same business. So it's up to the broker or the agent who's going out to understand and actually ask those probing questions, because the person that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis may not actually be involved in those activities and don't see them as part of their business, even though from a tax point of view or a management point of view, they all come under the same business. So I think there's, questions to be asked on certainly from the broker's side, but also just a little bit of understanding about seasonality of the different enterprises. So, a bit of background work before you go out and talk to some of these people will give you a little bit of understanding, and will actually put you in a very good position with the farmer, that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and having that flexibility and understanding their business. You're likely to get a better return and response all round, really. So it just comes back to the level of service that you're prepared to commit to and deliver on the ground, really.
Okay. This is beginning to sound, Jill, quite tough for insurance companies. So in complex issues like this, in one issue, you're trying to get a claim moving along because that's what you want to do, and you're not getting a response because of the economic conditions that the farmer's operating under in the time of year. The next situation is a bit more serious. People like Bryan are giving you all the information and trying to make sure you get back quickly. How difficult is it to service these varying needs that you're getting in agricultural claims?
It can be at times, and we're also wise to, whilst the farmers are obviously having their pivotal times, which is lambing, harvest, all those things, that can give rise to a higher volume of claims. So it's the case of just trying to keep on top of those. Rightly, our farmers will demand, a swift response to potential large losses, be it fires, floods, environmental impact also. So it's just recognising the needs of those and being able to know when we should be chasing our loss adjusters and other suppliers, and also being live to the fact that we may not get a response purely because the insured is busy at that time. So, there's other things that we can do to try and speed up those settlements. We've all touched on tech already, but also just, faster payments when we get to the point of claim. Going back to the 10 years ago, probably the farmers would prefer a cheque in their hand, whereas again, we've moved on from that, and electronic transfers can allow for much speedier settlements. And again, with the way that this last 18 months has gone, the uptake in those electronic payments has been, has really, check is almost long gone now. So just using what we can, being live to all of our customers' needs, the end client and the brokers, and responding, as we can during those, the busy periods, which are also our busy periods.
Yeah. It's very challenging, and I think what we're able to do here to some of our colleagues and claims who haven't been involved in the agricultural market, we're seeing some similar things coming out of it, but in a slightly different background. So it is opening up some of the challenges. So let me put two questions together here, Chris. We've talked about the impact of the last 18 months of what actually has how has the pandemic and Brexit impacted upon us, and how do you see that given as some of the biggest challenges that we're going to have insurance claims over this year, but perhaps even over next year? How are these changes and the uncertainty going to impact on us?
So I think from a challenge perspective, over the last 18 months, I think there's two factors that immediately spring to mind. Sort of externally, we've got not a fundamental change, but a change in the way claims, the claims process plays through, in terms of access to contractors, increased contract costs, potentially delays in decision making, which slows things down at a time when we want to get things done. Conscious, a couple of comments earlier on around it's about the quality of the service and the quality of the process and the quality of the product. But that being said, that often plays through in how quickly you can get there as well. So it's not about getting there really fast. It's about getting there in the right way, but we can't afford for unnecessary delays. And I think there have been delays brought in because of the impact of the pandemic and the impact of Brexit. That it's very, very different now from those perspectives. So they're the challenges. Sort of internally, and Jo's a lot closer to this than I am, but 18 months ago, Jo was sat in an office with her team right in front of her, which made the internal processes a lot slicker and a lot easier. Everyone's now sat in bedrooms and living rooms and garden sheds and whatever else. So it just kind of makes that personal contact, referrals, any escalation requirements. It just makes it that much more difficult than being when you sat next to colleagues. So there's the internal challenge of having to find very quickly last March, establish different ways of working that didn't bring in internal delays that were avoidable.
Yeah, that is a big impact that affects everybody. There are many discussions over the productivity effects, positive and negative, and I think as we slowly return to things, or if we fully return for part of time, I don't think we know how that's going to work out over the next few months. But Frank, this is quite interesting because as we look, there are other impacts in the insurance industry that both the pandemic and Brexit has brought to us, amongst a few other things like the Suez Canal blockage, etc., which is it's coming along in two things. First of all, material supply, and I guess that's got to be absolutely vital when you're looking at repairing something in an agricultural claim. But secondly, the availability of people to actually make the work good again. How are you finding that, and what other challenges do you see in the coming year?
Yeah, it's certainly been a big challenge recently, Alan. I think where we're seeing there's been multiple price increases in steel, which agricultural buildings are effectively big steel portal frames, and also availability of materials. So we're seeing claims costs increasing, and that impacts on the value at risk. If a building is, as a set sum insured, that sum insured may have been perfectly adequate to rebuild 18 months ago. But if the farmer's not aware of these huge price increases, he might be left with a shortfall in the insurance payment and the actual rebuild cost. And the availability, you're right, availability of materials is causing a headache. The claim process is taking longer because it's taking longer to repair or rebuild and then present final invoices. There's a couple of other things I've seen with lockdown. Lots of people have bought dogs and now want to walk those dogs in the countryside, a place where they're maybe not very familiar with. And whilst the dog might be perfectly fine roaming around the local park, when you let it off the lead in a field of sheep, it's going to want to chase the sheep. It might want to harm the sheep. But a lot of dog owners don't appreciate that a dog chasing a ewe and lamb causes immense stress, and it can lose the fetus. So that's an increase in claims for sheep worrying. And I think with effective pandemic and COVID-safe production of materials and machinery, we've seen some big increases recently in second-hand values of machinery and ATVs, just because new models are not coming off the production line quick enough. So there's more demand for second-hand ATVs and the like.
Okay. This is, Bryan, this is all sounding familiar to me from other areas that we look at in claims. And of course, why would it be different? But of course, the numbers we're talking about could be different, even if the risks, etc. aren't. So in looking for the challenges in 2023, I guess as a broker, it's how do you manage your clients through what may be up and coming price increases, risk changes, value of cover, etc.
Yeah, it's been a real challenge actually the past year in particular. Our job is obviously to advise clients, and that's what we've been trying to do every day. Farmers know that the price of steel's doubled, the price of timbers, some timbers have doubled. Concrete you can hardly get hold of. So it's not just the rebuild cost, but as Frank said, the availability of materials is a real issue. So they know that as well. So it's not telling them something they don't know, but we're advising them saying, look, in the event of a claim, this is the impact that it does have. So, you know, let's have, this year we've been really spending a lot of time on the building sums insured, for example, and looking at that. Is that adequate now to rebuild the building? Because a year ago it might have been, and this year you may all of a sudden find yourself 20 or 30% lower or short of where you need to be because of the increases. So, you know, what we're speaking to insurance companies as well, speaking to clients, but also insurance companies, we're looking at trying to get them to do things like day one uplifts on policies to try and give the client a better protection, because, you know, in the next year, who knows what's going to happen to the prices. They might continue to rise, they might fall. So we find it's quite unfair on a client if they have adequately insured at the time of inception of the policy, can quite quickly find themselves underinsured. So, we're speaking to insurers about that. We're also the delays in machinery, and I suppose that's part of the pandemic and Brexit, and maybe getting machines into the country from importing them. So that's having a knock-on effect in terms of loss of income potentially if you can't get machinery in. What they thought might have been 3 or 4 months might now be, a year. So as a result, we're looking at the length of indemnity periods on the business interruption in the policy to make sure that's adequate. So, if you've got specialist bits of kit, we're really looking at, what can we do here to make sure that they aren't going to be affected. So the last year has probably been, certainly since I've been doing agricultural insurance, has been the most challenging in terms of the changes that's been happening, the availability of materials and the costs, and making sure that we advise clients. But, that's our job to advise clients and also work with insurance companies to come up with solutions to make sure that the client isn't any worse off.
It is a big challenging area, isn't it, Jackie, at the moment? So how Brexit, the pandemic, ships stuck in the wrong place. And we've talked a lot about how this will affect the farmer in terms of claims, but we just went on to business interruption there, an area of the industry that has come under a lot of pressure recently. Are we going to see business interruption claims, do you think, coming out for loss of production because of all these various shortfalls that we've talked about elsewhere?
Certainly that's a possibility. I'm not sure that many farmers would actually see that as a claim. Just within the have I lost you?
No, you're still with us.
Right, that's okay. Sorry, you've all frozen on my screen. I'm not sure that they would see that as or thought about it in those business terms. I mean, if we think about the labour on farm, we were already seeing shortages of labour pre-pandemic. That was an effect of Brexit, and certainly it's been compounded by the pandemic. And the whole issue around supplies, the supply chain upstream and downstream has been impacted because of the pandemic. But as looking forward, we're now in what we call the transition programme for agriculture. As we came out of the EU, we came out of the Common Agricultural Policy, and DEFRA, through the Agricultural Bill and the Environment Bill that's currently going through Parliament, are looking for policy direction changes. And so farmers are also having to deal with things like changes to the subsidy payments and changes to the way of working. And I think they will be looking at, where else can they bring additional income through, and how do they change their business to cope with it going forward. So in some ways, the pandemic has perhaps speeded up that process. But equally, they've got to work within the framework of the agricultural transition plan as well. So there will be a lot happening in this space in the next few years, and the insurance industry will be impacted by that as well.
Gosh, that's really, really. The whole thing, I guess, Joe, is becoming much more complex now and difficult to guess as you move forward, or calculate, or underwrite, however we want to look at the future. So, where do you think are the biggest challenges post-pandemic, if we are in a post-pandemic issue, post-Brexit, which we certainly are in, and how do you think that will affect the policy issues and challenges that we're going to face?
I mean, some of what we've touched on potentially isn't actually insurable. Things like having perhaps a shortage of seasonal workers and things, but it's just a case of understanding our market and being live to that. In terms of business interruption, which we've touched on, for the most part, the farming activities were able to continue. So I don't think we've seen the same impact on the farming community as, leisure, tourism, retail, those sorts of things, which had to lock down. The farming was obviously an essential service, and that has meant that the volume of claims, shall we say, hasn't been as wide as other sectors. We will continue to, I'm sure, see a backlog of contractors' availability going through the next year or so until things really calm down, and hopefully the availability of materials will, settle down within the next 12 months or so, hopefully, and then we get some stability on the prices. But at the moment, as everyone's alluded to, the prices are just going up, and those some insured implications are, remain very much at the forefront of all of our minds. So that when you come to claim, they're not penalised at the end for, something that to an extent is without control for the end client.
Mm. I mean, that's fascinating. And what's striking me here is the commercial implications are very wide. Not always as clear as they could be, and that must be challenging absolutely everybody in every area of the claim as it is to all of you. So, Chris, well, looking at how that's impacted and looking at the possible changes we get, we know technology's played a difference. We've discovered that rather a lot. So what future-proofing do we need now to ensure that we're best placed to meet the needs of the customers? Because at the moment, it's very difficult to try and anticipate exactly how all this is going to turn out and in what time scale it might change.
So I think for us, it's about controlling the controllable. We need to continue to evolve. We need to continue to, speak to and listen to the feedback from all our key stakeholders to make sure that we are evolving in the right ways. The changes that we made post 2017 really to our business helped us in the pandemic, insofar as we, as I said earlier on, we're full cycle e-trade now. There's much less touch points, there's far fewer touch points from that perspective. So the way the business is set up enables us to kind of navigate our way through the pandemic. So it's about, for us, it's about being on the front foot, speaking to all those stakeholders in the process to make sure that we're receiving that feedback and able to react, and making sure that we're continuing to evolve. So when the next, heaven forbid, when the next pandemic or whatever the next huge challenge that we face into happens, we're kind of set up and we're ready to react to it.
Yeah, that's true, Chris. Frank, of course, the huge challenges are coming at the same time to some extent just now, which is really piling it on top of how you're going to resolve these issues. So how do you see it playing out, and what do you think really we're going to need to do to protect both the industry and the clients? Because, both have to be protected to help each other out in lines of business. And how do you think that's going to play out over the next 12 to 24 months?
I think it's very difficult to predict. I speak to engineers and shed builders, and whilst prices are just going one way at the moment, they're hoping that markets will settle down, availability of materials will improve, and prices might come back. Bryan touched on day one policies. I think especially farm brokers have the work cut out for them, because farm policies are not an off-the-shelf package policy with unlimited sums insured, and understanding the farm business and getting the covers right, and avoiding any gaps in cover is something that is really important going forward.
Okay. It's going to be tough then, Bryan. You're the guy who the customer comes to for all the advice. So again, I'm going to say, what future proofing do we need to do now to make sure that we're best placed to meet the customers and address? I mean, we've got regulatory changes, we've got the work and environmental changes, we've got Brexit. I'm not trying to make you feel anyway exposed here. pandemic that we hope's over, but has left implications on it. We've got shortage of materials and shortage of labour and increasing costs. What do you think we need to do to protect ourselves through all of this, Bryan?
Yeah, make it sound easy, Alan. Listen, it's a challenge at the moment for all brokers. I think within farming and within agriculture at the moment, what you'll see, what's happening is more and more farmings are becoming diverse, and more farmers are becoming bigger and bigger. The bigger farmers are becoming bigger, and the smaller farmers are being bought out. So what we are seeing is a real tide towards big farms and bigger farms. The farms are only going to get bigger. I can't see how it's very difficult at the moment for the smaller farms to survive. So the bigger boys at the moment are taking them over. So what we're looking for when it comes to speaking with insurance companies is they have to now start planning ahead what's going to happen, because the bigger farms, as I say, are only going to get bigger. They're diversifying into all sorts of different things, which historically wouldn't maybe sit under what a farm insurer would take on. So for us as a broker, it can be a bit of a challenge to look at, where should this risk be placed. But renewable energy being the big one, I think things like biomass boilers, it's very difficult for the insurance companies. Do sympathise. Everything in insurance, as you know, is worked off with historical data. Something new comes in. How do you understand it? How do you price it? A bit of a challenge. How do you deal with the claims? Again, another challenge. So I think getting insurance companies to work with manufacturers early on to understand what the risk is, understanding because things like biomass boilers, I think a lot of 5 to 10 years ago, is what you said earlier, people didn't really understand how they worked fully, and they were probably insured at a level that was quite cheap with not much conditions. Now we're seeing the opposite of that. There's been quite a few claims, as Chris touched on earlier. So now once they're in, it can be quite difficult for clients to meet the policy conditions and criteria at that level. So I think it's getting ahead of the game, understanding where the farms are going, and us working with insurance companies to try and get to a point where the client's able to actually insure it, and if something goes wrong, we can actually sort out the repair and get it back up and get the business up and running.
Okay, thanks. Before I give the last word to Joe, I think on that as well as in other parts of the industry, we're seeing data become more instant. Some of that's through satellite stuff and take weather claims, etc. You can get. So it's going to be interesting how we can do that, because historical data is now increasingly becoming far less relevant in parts of it, simply because of the speed of change at the moment, and that's part of the technology we'll have to look at. So Joe, I guess the last one goes to you. Where do you see the proofings required? What do we have to do to try and make sure that we can make sure that everybody in this is protected, but everybody is protected for the future by making sure insurers can insure it at the right price to the customer, for the broker, most of all for themselves, to still be making sure that there's long-term protection, long-term products in an area which is perhaps more complex than most. But when it comes down to it, still suffers from similar variables. So where do you see we're going to have to protect ourselves in the future?
I think communication with all our stakeholders is absolutely key. We're reliant on both our supply chain, but also our broker partners. They're potentially, closer to the client. They will, inform us how, technology, again, on the farms themselves are changing. We need to be able to adapt to that. We need to understand it. I mean, I would say 10 years ago, I didn't know how a biomass boiler worked either. And working with our suppliers to, help train our teams to have a better understanding of that, which can then be passed on or, in conjunction with our underwriting team, so that, there is a good understanding of how things have moved on and what we do when something goes wrong. The test of any insurance policy is when the claim comes in, and we need to make sure that we stay on top of these changes and understand them. Without that, it makes life very difficult in terms of pricing things correctly, but also how to deal with those claims when they materialise, which they do.
Okay, thanks. I think what I've picked up from all of this is we've touched the iceberg in some very complex situations. And although the process and its high level and everything becomes very familiar to everybody in the insurance claims world, this is really fascinating. And I think we're going to have to come back quite a few times in the future to dig a little bit more deeply into this, but also to follow, for all those that are interested in agricultural claims and others, also follow how this unfolds over the coming months, because I suspect from listening to you, and we're nearly into August and all the implications that would have in agricultural claims, I guess we're going to have to follow this through and make sure we can keep each other up to date and pick up as much advice as we can. So anybody who's listening to this, if you have any questions or thoughts, or if you have any questions for any of our excellent panelists, please just drop me a note at alan@iloveclaims.com. We'd be delighted to talk to you. We will revisit this with most of these people again fairly soon. It's been a good broad view, but I think there's what we often get in webinars as opposed to conferences is a recognition that the problems are common with the various people that are involved in the claims process at whatever stage they are. And really good to see everybody trying to work so hard to get over some of these challenges that we have in front of us. So again, thanks very much to our panelists, to Chris, to Frank, to Brian, to Jackie, and to Joe. Really appreciate your advice. We'll look forward to hearing from you again soon. One quick reminder, 11th of November is the ILC Home and Property Claims Conference at the Rico Arena in Coventry. If you want to go on the reserve list for our excellent networking lunch with another 450 people, most of them will probably be the same actually, and the 1st of October. Again, just let me know. Thank you very much to the panelists for this initial look at agricultural claims. Thanks very much for listening. You've been listening to the webinar on the ILC Home and Commercial Series looking at environmental and agricultural claims. My name is Alan Suter. I'm the chair of ILC Home and Commercial. Again, a big thanks to our major sponsor, Questgates, and to our silver sponsor, RSK Raw, for the support. If you get any questions or suggestions connected to this subject, please just drop me a note at alan@iloveclaims.com. I'll be delighted to hear from you, and we look forward to speaking with you again in this series in the next webinar.